what you value is not what you are. Now, I think values are important, and studying why people value what they do is important. That's why I've been into things like MBTI. That's why I made 4 very long and complicated videos on spiral dynamics to study value systems and how they evolve and change and how they affect behavior. Nonetheless, values are not who you are or what you do. And a simple story from my past is growing up, I did not believe in God. I thought the idea was God is stupid. And I thought the idea of God and religion was so stupid, I just assumed everyone else thought it was real stupid until I was in 7th grade and realized that just about everyone else in my class believed in God. And then they would say to me, well, who created the universe if not God? And I'm like, well, it was the Big Bang. So that change shows a change in values, a difference in values. Oh, I don't value some nonsense that was told to me because I'm supposed to believe in it. I reject the idea of believing hocus pocus. I reject the idea of believing something based upon faith. That's against my values. I believe in science. That was my values. And therefore, what was the first thing that I did to assert my how I value science over faith? I decided that I will believe in the Big Bang based upon a faith-based belief in what supposed scientists have passed down. And then, years later, you learn, oh, their math doesn't work. They have to invent dark matter without any evidence. They have to invent dark energy without any evidence. They have to suppress information about quasars and red shifts that show that their justification for the Big Bang is nonsense. Oh, there are many people in science who question the Big Bang, although not really mainstream, so you will hear about it. Oh, the Big Bang is just a faith-based belief. Now, believing in science and therefore believing in the Big Bang over God poofed it all into existence definitely shows an evolution in value systems. It's showing that you value science, empirical observation, what is tangible and real, over reality. However, just because you value science and you value being objective, empiricism, doesn't mean you actually do that. And this is a big problem with value systems. People decide that they value something and then they believe that's who they are. And it could be with anything. And I'm going to show some examples. But no, another simple example would be religion. There are lots of people who will say that they're whatever, Jewish or Christian, or they value all sorts of religious beliefs. And then they'll go do the complete opposite. Again, because your values are not who you are, and valuing systems, just because you value something doesn't mean anything more, except you will use the same cognitive bias and lots of other mechanisms of faulty reasoning to just go along and support your values and your beliefs, but you're not actually going to be that. Now, a good example of this is a very boring and annoying person, Penn Jillette. So what I'm going to do is show a video of him talking at the Cato Institute, and then I'm going to analyze it to show how just because you value something doesn't mean that's what you are.
My life, I'm in show business. I got this kind of impotent ponytail back here. I probably should be a liberal. I probably should be a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I should be feeling the burn. And instead, I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe you should feel my Johnson. But I'm not. I'm not feeling the burn, and I'm not really a liberal. And everybody who is libertarian or Cato, the way the media and the way people tend to present us is that we're conservatives, or we're people with money that want to smoke dope, is what's sometimes said. And it's really not true at all for me. I do not come from to libertarianism because I am a really successful business person or a CEO, or because I have to fight regulations or any of that kind of stuff. I really come to it from a purely hippie point of view. I have always been a peacenik, And when it got to be the 80s, I met a man named Tim Jennison. I don't know if any of you saw a movie that I made called Tim's Vermeer. But it's a movie about a genius who started to figure that maybe Vermeer, the 17th century painter, had used lenses and equipment to be able to paint, and maybe what we were actually seeing from that time was photographs from the 17th century and not paintings at all. It's a crazy thing. It took us 5 years to make the movie. It took us a lot of money. Tim founded Newtek, which is a video company that kind of let CNN edit the first Gulf War. It made video editing. It changed the whole world, and he made an awful lot of money that way. And I became very close friends with Tim Jennison before he was painting a Vermeer in his warehouse in Texas. And I was then just your kind of standard liberal there in the end of the 80s. And Tim was libertarian. He was pro-freedom. And Tim was also brilliant. And Tim was also really successful. And Tim was also compassionate. And Tim was also a peacenik. And I started giving all the arguments for why the government had to be more powerful and do all these things, and all the arguments that you now hear as feeling the burn. And Tim said a really simple sentence to me. He said, "Do you think it's okay to punish people who've done nothing wrong?" And I said no, even though I kind of felt somewhere in my heart it was a trick question. And then he said, "Then why is it okay to reward people who've done nothing right?" And he said, "Because can't you see that you can't reward without punishing? They are the same thing." And that shut me up for a little while. And then Tim started saying, "You know, you're so against force. You've never hit anybody in your life. You have been beat up. You've been in carnival situations that have gone badly, and people have hit you and you've not hit them back because you didn't think it was life-threatening. You are insanely peacenik in terms of the way you see war and what the country should do. Why do you think it's so okay for the government to use force to get things done that you think are good ideas?" And Tim and I were very, very close. And Tim did not try to seduce me. Tim did not try to make the things we disagreed on seem like nothing. He said, "You're wrong. You're an asshole. Think about this." Turns out to me, that's the way you argue with me, because that's the way you show respect. You're saying, I'm really telling what I really think. I'm not going to try to trick you or try to be nice or suck you in. I'm just telling what I think. And I started thinking that one really good definition of government is supposed to have a monopoly on force. They're the only ones who are allowed to use force legally. And then we are supposed to be the government. And I didn't come up with any sort of belief in the invisible hand will make us all richer or there'll be prosperity. I know people make those arguments, and they're probably right, but that's not where any of my love for libertarianism comes. It comes from this simple idea that the government are the guys with the guns, and we are the people who tell the government what they can do. So in my morality, I shouldn't be able to tell anyone to do something with a gun that I wouldn't do myself. Now, I want to add here that I am incompetent and I am a coward. So this is all theoretical, what I'm about to say. I wouldn't actually be able to accomplish this stuff. But if you asked me, if someone is being murdered, would you use a gun to stop that murder? Now that's saying that I know it's a real murder going on and I know the person is innocent and all of that stuff going on. But this is the Godonkin, it's a thought experiment. Would I use a gun to stop a murder? Yeah. Would I use a gun to stop a rape? Yeah. Would I use the threat of a gun? Stop robbery? Yeah, I think you kind of got to. Would I use a gun to protect our country and our way of life? Yeah. Would I use a gun to build a library? No.
Okay, what could I possibly say about that? First, an apology for making people sit through that, but at least you have to kind of see what we're dealing with. Here we can see someone who is totally ignorant about the whole world of leftist thought. And I'm not talking about socialist thought or anarchism. I'm talking about anyone who's on the liberal side, going from Bernie Sanders, who isn't really much of a liberal, to Karl Marx, that whole spectrum of people. He's totally ignorant of the mindset, of the view of how the world works. Yet he says, well, I should be a liberal. You're talking about someone his value system, his values are of critical thinking and skepticism. That's what he values. But that doesn't mean that's what he is. He's the complete opposite, because he's so arrogant and full of himself and obnoxious that it makes him the most extreme example I could think of someone who values one thing and does the opposite. Because he values critical thinking, he just assumes that everything that he thinks is critical thinking. And everything he says must be critical thinking. All his beliefs must be from critical thinking and skepticism. In terms of... I'm going to get to break down his values and his conclusions in a moment. But the thing with being skeptical, we are all skeptics when it comes to things that we don't believe in. As a Jew will be skeptical of Christians, Muslims will be skeptical of Christianity, and so forth, whatever example you want to use. The only person who could possibly be more skeptical than others is the person who is skeptical of the things that they do believe in. To just filter reality in a way that you use all this critical thinking and skepticism against stuff you don't believe in, but you don't apply to what you do believe in, doesn't make you a critical thinker, it just makes you like everyone else. But because this Penn guy has an audience where he can constantly use critical thinking against things he doesn't believe in, he just believes he's a critical thinker. So he can't understand why it's okay to use force to build a library, which is like the most basic social service. Now, anyone on the left would have these questions like, why is it that we live in a world where, like, I think 62 people own as much as the bottom half of humanity? Why is it that we live in a world where certain people in this capitalistic class own the means of production, and other people have to sell their labor in order to get the means to subsistence? Why is it that once upon a time people just walk around and take the means of subsistence, wherever they found it, and now we have ownership of land, ownership of resources, ownership of ideas? Suddenly, there's this world of owners, and a world where people must submit to sell their labor for the means of survival. He doesn't question that. How is it that this capitalistic class became the capitalistic class? What special thing did they do? What type of special shit comes out of their asses that makes them so special that delivers the goods to everyone else? Because, really, if you look at ancient religions, the idea of, like, Egypt, that the pharaoh was the god and because he was the god, that's how people got the means of survival. That's how they got their food. We have the same thing right now in the capitalism. People believe that the capitalistic class is somehow special, that they're the wealth producers, they're the job producers, that they give a shit. If we didn't have Bill Gates, we wouldn't have fucking computers. People are so fucking delusional about this stuff. Of course, people on the left realize that it is the working class, the people who actually go and make all this shit, come up with the ideas, do it, that then they don't get to keep it. So we have a world where the capitalistic class appropriates the stuff made by the working class. And these social services are just a meager way to slightly redistribute the wealth. That way we don't have a working class that's killing themselves because their jobs are so horrible like we have in China. We don't have people working 18 hours a day, such as in the Industrial Revolution. Or, how about just look up South Korea, where you have people literally dying because they're working like over 30 hours in a row. But all that's fine to this Penn guy's view of liberty, because he values liberty. He just because but the value doesn't change the fact that he's been culturally conditioned to question attacks against capitalism, but to ignore the problems with capitalism. The tyranny of capitalism is totally invisible to him. That's why to him it's tyranny to use force to collect funds to build a library, but it's not tyranny to use force so some tiny capitalistic class can defend their monopoly over wealth, essentially. Because that's the world that we live in, one of structural classism, a class system that perpetuates poverty for the vast majority, and then we have, the, kind of managerial class who thinks that the system works for everyone, and then we have the owners at the very top. But even analyzing that is totally beyond him, because he doesn't. It's just irrelevant. I mean, maybe I'm not the critical thinker that he is, but he, according to him, that's irrelevant. It's not going to come up in anything that he discusses. Or you just stop this at violence. You cannot use violence to redistribute wealth, but you can use violence for the capitalistic class to collect all the wealth. That's his conclusions. But his values, interestingly, are of liberty and freedom. He doesn't value tyranny. He doesn't value that violence should be used against others. Just the fact that capitalism is a system of violence, the fact that capitalism is a system that demands that you have a state that uses violence to keep the working class down, that's totally invisible to him. Because regardless of what his values are, he's been culturally conditioned under capitalism, under this cultural hegemony, where the values of the people at the very top filter down and tell everyone else what their values should be. So it's totally invisible to him. And that's it. Your values are not who you are. And I'm going to go to some different graphs now, so you don't have to look at me anymore. And we're going to get into this a little bit further to understand how the confusion of values for who you are can be used to serve capitalism, and how maybe we should be aware of it. Okay, there are charts like this that are easy to find all over the internet. This is a simple one that I thought would be best to talk about. And I want to explain why this is nonsense. So there's this notion that you can take value systems and from that derive political beliefs in a very simple way. And we're just going to kind of break this thing apart very quickly. We have in here the economic right, which is going to be the more capitalistic, and then there's the economic left, which is going to be more of collectivist systems, whether it's a socialist system, like a commune, all the way to the Soviet Union, and there are obviously you can have an authoritarian or a libertarian side to both of these, but it's setting up this dichotomy. And the idea is that on the economic right, people will believe more in free trade, letting business do what it needs to do, not getting in the way. And on the economic left is the idea that the freedom of the individual should be subjugated to the needs of the many. So we have that kind of dichotomy going on. The problem with this is it's being filtered through life under capitalism. So you might have someone who's on the economic right because their values are that we need personal freedom and liberty, and they look at the state as an intrusion against that and as an intrusion against individuality. In the meantime, you might have someone who's on the economic left because they've seen what life is like under like sweatshop labor, and they believe that forcing people to live under those conditions is an affront on individual expression, the ability of the individual to advance or develop themselves, and in the name of liberty and freedom and the individual, they are on the economic left. So we can see how people could end up on complete opposite sides of this, even with very similar base values, but those base values are going to be filtered through the cultural programming that they are exposed to and what they see in their lives. So while it is important, I think, to study value systems and how they inform political opinion, this is way, way, way too simple. Here is another chart. It might be harder to read, but this is someone's attempt to take Miggs Breyer's personality types and chart that out to where someone is going to be politically. And it's nice to see that INFP at the top right, what I am, is supposed to be a communist. Again, you cannot do this because you might have two INFPs which are living in very different places, and one might think that freedom is the freedom to do whatever they want with their money, and someone else might think freedom is not having to work 15 hours a day at some shitty job. Here's another chart, but what I think is the most essential point to this is the capitalism propaganda component. Under capitalism, I think we're told that, yeah, there's poverty, there's people who don't have that much, there might be some homeless people, maybe we have people starve to death, but we have to have it this way or else we're going to lose individual freedom. So we must have those people starve to death to live on the street in order for you to conserve your freedom. Of course, no one is ever told they must starve so other people can have freedom. Your people are just generally told, well, we have to have a world where other people are starving so you can have your freedom. Because as soon as you're the person or it's your family who's starving, who can't support themselves, who are living on the street, well, all of a sudden you're not going to give a fuck about this. But we're told that this sacrifice is for the greater good, because either we have individuality or tyranny, and that's it. Of course, when you have people homeless, starving, that type of thing, that's not freedom. That's not self-expression. That's tyranny of the ruling class not knowing what to do with excess labor. We have this dichotomy that says it's the group or the individual, or there's so many people on the left, these libertarians, that they like to talk about the evils of collectivism. Of course, they never want to talk about the evils of collectivism and the private dictatorship of the factory floor. The way I look at it is, if you want a world that allows for each individual to become themselves fully, to fully develop themselves, you need to have the support of the community. And going back in time where people fend for themselves off the land, that's not the ultimate expression of individual liberty or freedom to survive by yourself off in the woods or whatever, because as soon as you introduce other people, you introduce people who you can learn from, you introduce the flow of ideas, you allow people to see art, or you allow different types of self-expression, but you also allow people to get the benefits of being in a community. That's going to feed into their self-expression. Such as, if someone's into music, well, being in a world where you can hear metal or jazz or other types of music, that's going to help you to develop yourself as a musician, or other types of art, or whatever. Or maybe you're a scientist. The best way to develop yourself as a scientist is probably not to run out into the woods and try to start from ground zero and hopefully in 1,000 years you'll develop calculus by yourself. No, the idea is to be in a world where you can learn from others and share ideas from others, while of course having the individuality and in the system to go off on your own direction when appropriate. So the idea that just leave me alone and fuck you all is somehow the ultimate expression of individuality, and that it somehow aids your individuality to have someone else starving to death on the streets, begging for money in the subway, something like that. That's just fucking absurd and stupid. We need a world not that's based upon collectivism and not based upon individuality, but based upon a proper balance of both. A world that values the individual I think that's the primary thing, but you have to understand that if you go, in order to value the individual, you have to value the group. You need to have this group support the individual. And what these stupid political charts do is they create this dichotomy, and that dichotomy between the individual and capitalism has nothing to do with reality. That's just a warped worldview created by the capitalistic class or cultural hegemony under capitalism. Okay, bye.